Hello, Larry. I am very glad to meet you, and I am looking forward for our today's meeting.
Thank you, Jan. It's always a pleasure. I've been looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, so we are talking about freedom, and today I would like to talk about freedom as a concept and as an essential element of social systems. What does it mean not to have freedom in social systems? So first of all, we should define freedom. How do you define it?
It's a great question because freedom is not always the same thing to everybody. So it's important that we define the terms. Freedom, I believe, is the absence of unjustified coercion. Sometimes coercion or force or compulsion is justified. And in my belief, that's when a person's actions have the effect of denying another person his rights or her rights to life, to property, to freedom of association, that sort of thing. But as long as you leave people alone, then you should be free. You should have freedom, and so should other people. So it's the absence of unjustified coercion, but there is so much more to it than that, of course. It requires certain institutions and mentalities and an understanding of how it's implemented and all the gray areas and so forth.
Yeah, because generally people are bad people. So if you leave people free, they will organize crime. They will do the crime. So we have introduced some kind of coercion.
Yeah, your freedom should not mean less freedom for someone else who's entitled to just as much of it as you are. It's been said many times that your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. That's one way to put it, because it essentially tells us that as long as you don't do violence to another person's equal rights, then as long as you leave them alone, they should leave you alone in freedom for you to make your decisions, choose your path, as long as you do no harm to others.
But if you see our present political situation in our region, I mean, Ukraine wasn't left in peace. She didn't attack Russia, and it was attacked. So, however, we need some kind of social system not to allow this violence, which is natural, which is produced by people. Does it matter for individuals that they are free or not?
Oh, I certainly think it does. It matters immensely, and that's because of our very nature. We are made to be free. The whole purpose of the way in which we were created, the very nature of human beings, cries loudly for individual freedom. Why? Well, think of it. We're not robots, right? Each of us has his own mind. And no two people who have ever lived on this planet have been exactly the same. And so that speaks to a very precious uniqueness in every individual. If that's the case, well, then how do you exercise your uniqueness? How can you be you unless you have the freedom to make choices, to be different from other people, so long as you do them no harm? So if we were made the same, one to another, if we were just a fleet of robots, or if we were just a colony of ants, then it would be hard to make a case for freedom. But that's not the way human beings are. We are, each and every one of us, unique, special, precious, different, and we can't be ourselves if we don't have the freedom to exercise personal choices.
If you see the society of North Korea, these people are slaves completely. They are, I think that they are not even aware that they're slaves. These people are completely reprogrammed.
Yeah.
I think what ideas or mentalities are essential for freedom to exist?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised North Korea, because there is so little freedom there. Perhaps it's the least free country in the world. But the leader at the top is certainly free. He has lots of freedom. He clearly likes it, but he just doesn't like it for other people. He wants to have it for himself, but somehow he thinks that he is supposed to be the man anointed to tell everybody else what they can do. What are the mentalities that are needed to support freedom? Several. One, I think, is a respect for the equal rights of others. Clearly, the leader of North Korea does not have that. He does not have respect for the rights of others. He arrogates to himself every right that he chooses to have, at the same time that he denies those rights to other people. So you can't have a free society if people run around thinking that, oh, rights don't matter. There's no such thing as rights. Might makes right. Whoever's in charge gets to determine the rules, and that's the way it should be. So you have to have a mutual respect for the dignity, the rights, the contracts, the choices, and the property of your fellow human beings. That's part of the important mentality needed for freedom. Another thing, I think, is a kind of spirit of entrepreneurship. And you might think, well, what's that got to do with a freedom mentality? Well, you know, if we were all free, but then we just sat around waiting for our food to appear in front of us, we wouldn't get very far. We'd starve. We have to have an entrepreneurial spark. And some people have that to a far greater extent than other people. But somebody has to go out there and say, I will take the risks. I will build. I will create things. I will serve customers. I will be there with what people want. Yes, it means if I'm successful, I will earn some profit because of it, but that's what spurs me on. So an entrepreneurial spirit is very important to freedom because it helps to produce the fruits of freedom, which are goods and services at ever lower prices and ever higher quality. So that's very important. And then there are certain attitudes or character traits that are important. You have to have some degree of humility, of being humble. And what do I mean by that? I mean it in an intellectual sense. For freedom to survive, people cannot think of themselves as gods. They cannot think that, oh, I know everything, because that leads them eventually to the idea that, well, if other people differ with me, I'm going to have to just tell them what to do since I know best. So you have to be humble enough to recognize that as much as you might know, there is still a universe of knowledge out there that you don't know. So focus on self-improvement rather than trying to force other people to do what you want them to do. I think another mentality is responsibility. People have to be responsible. They can't run into a theater and cry fire if there is no fire. They can't fail at something because of poor judgment and then blame everybody else and expect some kind of subsidy or bailout for it. They have to step up to the plate and say, you know, I will be responsible for my mistakes. I'm going to hold myself accountable, and I'm going to try to learn from those mistakes. Plus, I think we have to be courageous. That's an important trait. Courage is so important. We live in a world, a dangerous world, in which there are plenty of people who would be happy for their own advantage to take some of your liberty, some of your freedom. So you have to be courageous. You have to stand up to them. You have to defend freedom. And you also have to have patience, I think, with people. You know, all of us every day run into people who aren't doing exactly what we think they should do, don't know yet what we think they should know, but don't cry about it. Don't try to beat them over the head with a club. Have a little patience and rely on persuasion. And if you can't win them over to your way of thinking, well, then leave them alone and move on to the next person. And finally, another mentality, I think, is gratitude. Having a grateful spirit is important. And what do I mean by that? That means a spirit of thankfulness, of realizing that, hey, not all the good things that happen to me in the world are of my own doing exclusively. a lot of good things that happened to me happened because other people did something. That's why I often complain to people of the left, people who like socialists. I often say, you know, you people seem never to be thankful for anything. Why don't you find an entrepreneur who's invented something, created something, and thank them for it? But they don't do that. You know, the left thinks, oh, they did it for profit, or they did it for selfish reasons. We can't thank them for that. Well, that means then you live a life of either thinking that you're more responsible than you really are for the good things that happen to you, and you're always looking for victims and oppressors. So have a grateful spirit. Those are the kinds of mentalities that are critical to freedom.
So I would like to emphasize that I completely agree with you as far as entrepreneurship is concerned, because when Jacek Spendel, he was younger, about 10 years before we met, and he was about to organize his foundation here in Poland. And he said that he wanted to organize the foundation of freedom. And I said, but there is no freedom without entrepreneurship. You should add and entrepreneurship. And he agreed. So we have this foundation that it operates in Poland. Because entrepreneurship also, you have to be responsible, you have to have a lot of ideas, and more, you live by your own means. You don't need means of others. So this is very good, I would say, quality of people. And what we are doing, going around the world, we are just combining this message. We put it together, the message about freedom and message, what does it mean entrepreneurship? Because it's completely strictly related.
Yeah, I agree, Jan. And if I could add, so many people seem to have a poor impression or idea of entrepreneurs. They think of them as, well, they do what they do for selfish reasons. And I always suggest to people, if you really believe that, you need to spend a little more time with entrepreneurs. And if you do that, I think what you'll find is they're not motivated so much by piling up gold coins and playing with them in their basement. They're motivated by the desire to create something, to invent, to innovate, to add wealth, add value to society. They love it when people say, I like your product, I'd like to buy another one. A good entrepreneur is happy to have customers who themselves are happy. It gives them a sense of fulfillment and achievement. And very few of them on their dying day will look back and say, I am so glad I made a lot of money, because they know they can't take it with them. I think on their dying day, most entrepreneurs would look back and say, wow, I made a difference in the world. I created things and people liked what I gave them or sold them. And that sense of fulfillment is far more important to most entrepreneurs than piling up gold coins.
There is a saying in Poland that the people are blaming others with using the features they have by themselves. So your leftists are blaming others. They are doing this for profit because they are so greedy and they want also to get power. How
many leftists, when it comes time, say, to sell their house, how many of them say, well, I could get I could get $500,000 for my house, but I don't want to be greedy. I'll be happy to sell it to this guy for 50,000.
Yes,
they don't behave. They don't behave that way, even themselves.
Yeah. Okay, let's imagine we have a group of people or a herd of monkey. Is it the right word? Herd of monkey?
Herd of monkeys, or
herd of monkeys,
or a pack, or I'm not sure.
Pack, okay. Yeah. And there are some individuals who are very aggressive. So you have to create some system and create some tools to maintain this freedom in the group. Yes. What kind of institutions are essential for freedom, that freedom exists?
Well, I think, and I know some who believe in liberty might not agree with me, because there is a streak of thinking among liberty lovers that we don't need any government, but that's a minority view. I think we need government. But then the question is, what should it do and how do you limit it? because government can be, on the one hand, a very beneficial institution if it protects the rights of people and if it keeps the peace, but it can be the most destructive institution if it is out of bounds, out of control, and if concentrated power is in the hands of truly evil people, which has happened a lot. So that's the question that is as old as man, practically, and that we've had to struggle with over the years. How do you set up a government that will be good and efficient and stick to its principal job without overstepping its bounds? That's probably an issue or a problem that we will always have to wrestle with. But then within government, you need certain institutions, you need and ideas, you need separation of powers. Even in government, you don't want one person to have all power. So you want some kind of separation of power so it doesn't concentrate in the hands of a few. That means certain institutions like maybe a veto in the chief executive as a check on the legislative branch. It means you have courts of law with certain rules like due process and habeas corpus and so forth, so that we conduct trials of people in a way that's fair to everybody and that tend to promote the finding of the truth. You need elections, and you need rules about elections, who can vote and at what age, and all those kinds of rules. So I think those are unavoidable issues. You're going to have to create such institutions whether you have a government or not, because somebody is sooner or later going to do some harm to somebody, and you have to have some institution that decides the extent of that harm and what damages were done and what the perpetrator needs to do to make good. So there are a lot of institutions of government that have been written about by people like Montesquieu and John Locke over the years. We're still working to perfect that, but the purpose is to enhance peace and liberty without doing harm to those institutions, and to prevent government from overstepping its boundaries.
So, however, to maintain these institutions, it requires the mutual effort of every member of the society, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You look back at, for instance, the ancient Roman Republic, which existed for almost half a millennia. What held it together was a widespread consensus among people that, hey, we've got some pretty important institutions in place here. They are there for a purpose. They're there to advance and protect liberty. Let's respect them. But when that breaks down, when the consensus breaks down and people start to say, hey, anything goes, whatever I want to do, who cares about the Constitution, rip it up if it serves my purpose, then before long, freedom goes out the window. And usually you have a period of chaos before some strongman knocks heads together to bring order. And then there go your freedoms. So now you've got concentration of power in the form of a king or an emperor or a tyrant of some kind.
We have one of our national heroes. It is Tadeusz Kościuszko. He was a freedom fighter. And also we have a lot of Poles who emigrated all over the world. And they contributed a lot to these new countries. They were accepted.
Yes.
Such a guy was Edmund Strzelecki, who went to Australia, and he discovered the highest mountain in Australia. And he named this mountain Tadeusz Kościuszko Peak. Okay, Australians are not able to pronounce Kościuszko, so they call it Koziuszko. And it is accepted in the law. When you climb this mountain in the summit, you have some information about Kościuszko. Okay, we live it, but we also have some saying of Edmund Strzelecki. He said that the Anglo-Saxon nations, they know how to build free society, and more, that they know how to maintain it. Agree with this?
Well, it's hard to agree 100% when I look at what's been happening in many Western democratic societies. There are enormous challenges to the maintenance of freedom in those societies these days. The consensus in places like Great Britain and the United States in particular is breaking down. There are a lot of people who don't seem to care much for the institutions of freedom, who want their way no matter what, even if it means trampling on other people. The consensus that we used to have on things like freedoms of speech and press are breaking down under the pressure of things like cancel culture, the intolerance of the left that is threatening those institutions we once had wide agreement on. So it's a never-ending battle to remind people of the importance of these institutions. Ultimately, what happens in human society is the product of what goes on up here, of ideas in people's minds. And so they can be good, they can be bad. You can have a very good society that's very free and supported by consensus and with a promising future. But if people's ideas change and they become harmful and destructive, they can flush all those good things down the toilet. It's happened time and again. The ancient Romans did it. They lost their republic because they lost a sense for what freedom is all about and what's required of each person in order to maintain it. So I would never take freedom for granted. Never assume that just because you have it, that you'll always have it, or that the future generations will always have it just because you did. No, it can be lost. Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is never more than one generation away from being extinguished. It all depends on people's ideas.
Yeah, and what do you think, what are the greatest threats to freedom?
The greatest threats to freedom would be, I would say, number one, is the assault on truth. The assault on truth. I don't see how a free society is possible when people come together around a search for what's right, search for truth. But when they abandon that, when effectively they think and then act accordingly as if truth doesn't matter, that more important things like personal, selfish, short-term advantage are more important than truth, well, society will begin to decay. It'll decay into conflict and chaos. You won't be able to rely upon the word of people who said, I will do this, I promise that, we can shake hands, we have a contract. If they're not committed to truth, then all that breaks down. And in the chaos that results, you don't get freedom, you usually get tyranny. You get some strong man who will bring order out of the chaos. So truth and a continuing commitment to it, valuing it for its own sake is very important to maintaining a free society. Remind me again, Jan, of the question that prompted that answer, because I've forgotten it already.
What are the main threats to freedom?
Oh, the main threats to freedom, yes, yeah. Yes. Certainly the increasing failure of society to respect property and enterprise. Every day I see people claiming things that do not belong to them. People who say, well, I'm a student and I incurred lots of debt to pursue my college career, and now I want that burden to be shifted to somebody else. I want the government to cancel my debt, which is another way of saying I want taxpayers to pick up the tab for what I promised to pay back. That's just one of many forms. There are a lot of people who think that the purpose of government isn't the protection of the peace and of your rights, but rather it's to be a middleman to get you what you want, to take it from somebody else, to rob Peter to pay Paul because you claim it. You think you're entitled to it. You can't have a free society if it's just a free-for-all, with everybody trying to use the political process to steal from each other. So that's a major threat today, because you have companies do it who run to the government and say, bail me out, give me special advantages, subsidize me. And you have lots of individuals thinking the same way, thinking that they are entitled to the fruits of other people's labor. So those are certainly among the greatest threats to freedom. But then, if you're a Ukrainian right now, the greatest threat to your freedom at the moment is a foreign government. So there are very harsh and immediate threats that take that form too, of governments from outside your jurisdiction who decide they want to take something you've got. And for Ukrainians, that's a very serious, real threat right now. So there are a lot of threats to freedom. The world is full of people who, if you give them the chance, give them concentrated power, they will be happy to use it to take your freedom, your property, and your rights.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
What do you think, what examples of freedom in history do you think are the most instructive, and how long they lasted?
Yeah, well, there are many, and I enjoy writing about these and researching them. Of course, the ancient Roman Republic is one of the best examples. Like America, Rome rose in defiance of tyranny, of kings. And because Romans in those early days, around 500 BC, were so tired of one-man rule, concentrated power, they overthrew the seventh of their kings and decided to form a republic, which they had for almost 500 years. And that republic had sacred institutions. It had an unwritten constitution supported by consensus and precedent. It had habeas corpus and due process and elected representative bodies. The Senate, which was made up of people who had direct lineage to the original founders, and then you had popularly elected assemblies in ancient Rome as well. Well, all that was lost within 500 years as Romans adopted a welfare warfare state, which decayed into the tyranny of the empire. But a more recent great example that people should study is a country called Ragusa. Oh. And it comes to mind because I just happen to know that today, June 27th, is the anniversary of the founding of the Republic of Ragusa in the year 1358. It was a strip of territory that included what is now Dubrovnik in Croatia. It was along the Adriatic, one of the freest countries in world history. It lasted for 450 years until 1808, when Napoleon, the tyrant that he was, occupied it and stripped Ragusans of their freedom. But for that period of time, Ragusa was a magnificent trading society. They even had term limits on their government, by the way. They wanted to keep it so small, they didn't want anybody to have power for very long. The term limits, believe it or not, for the top person in Ragusa was 1 month. That person was called the rector. And they said, you can be the rector, the top guy, you know, the president, so to speak, but you can only be in that job 1 month and you can't have it again for at least 2 years. They were so intent upon keeping government small and keeping Ragusa free that they formed those kinds of institutions. Fascinating place. They ended up with a commercial fleet plying the Mediterranean, engaging in massive trade, a commercial fleet that was even bigger than that of Venice, which was a major power at the time. We forget about Ragusa because Napoleon snuffed it out, but for 450 years, it was very free. And then a more recent example, I might say, is Hong Kong, which for decades, until communist China began in recent years to snuff out its freedoms, Hong Kong was one of the freest places on the planet. And not by coincidence, it was also one of the most prosperous. Even Germany, after World War II, here was a country that was defeated, devastated, flattened, occupied, swamped by millions of refugees from the East. It had had a decade and a half of experience with socialism of one kind or another under Hitler, and now after the war, what do to recover? A man named Ludwig Erhard, first finance minister, later chancellor, he said very quickly one night, he said, the next morning, We will have no more price controls. We'll have a sound currency. We're going to cut taxes and tariffs. We're going to get off your backs. We're going to have a free economy. And within a decade, by the end of the 1950s, this defeated, devastated, occupied country became once again the most prosperous country in Western Europe. How did they do it? Not through more socialism, but they did it through freedom. Socialism has no such examples they can point to. No place in world history can they say, can a socialist say, here's an example of a country that was capitalist, and because it was capitalist, it was a disaster, and socialism came in and saved it. No, there's no such place. Capitalism always ends up having to save socialism, and there are several examples I just gave you.
Okay. And what about your fatherland? I mean, the United States.
Yes. I mean, we were once a very poor country. You go back to 1780, just a few years after the Declaration of Independence, and 90-some% of Americans were living in poverty. We had an entrepreneurial class. We had people who were making money from and off of the government, but 90% of people were farmers, small shopkeepers, and were poor. A century later, we were a leading world power with standards of living many times higher than what we had when we started. So yeah, America has been a great example too of what you do when you have freedom. You produce and you create and you do all kinds of wonderful things. Doesn't mean you're perfect. You make mistakes, as any country does. But America brought freedom to more people ultimately than just about any other country in the world.
Yeah, thank you. And the last question, because we are a little limited in time, we have maybe 5 minutes. What do you say when people ask you, does freedom work? And when does freedom fail?
First thing I would ask them, well, what do you mean by work? Because different people will mean different things by that. Freedom doesn't work to a would-be communist or socialist because they don't want that. They want to be in charge. So the freedom to them is a failure. They want a system that puts them in charge. So freedom doesn't do that. So they think freedom fails. But if you say, well, by works, I mean, it produces the best life and opportunity for the most people, I would say absolutely freedom does that. Especially for people who learn to be enterprising and creative and innovative and entrepreneurial. It's the environment of freedom that will allow them to do wonderful things. So if you say, well, when I say works, I mean, does it enhance personal choice and liberty? I would say, well, yeah, by definition, that's what freedom is all about. All other isms tend to subjugate the individual to the whims of those with political power. So, and then if you look at the Index of Economic Freedom produced by the Heritage Foundation, or the Economic Freedom of the World Index produced by the Fraser Institute, by any of those kinds of indexes, you'll find that the countries that are the freest invariably are the ones that produce the most goods and services that actually solve problems for people.
Yeah, and the last question, what is your vision of the future? Because we have the war now, and China is eager to declare the new war. And what do you think, how it would be in our world? Would it become more freer or less?
We certainly have big challenges, don't we? Those of us who believe in freedom every day are working to turn back some of these threats and challenges. But that's always been the case. Most of the people who have ever lived on this planet have not lived in freedom. They've lived as serfs or slaves or in fear of those with political power. So it's not a new thing to have to fight these challenges. I'm very optimistic. I am very hopeful for the future because I think the message is a very powerful one, that people should be free, that they cannot be themselves unless they have freedom. We just have to work harder and get better at making the case. And if we do, tomorrow will be a freer and better place in which to live.
Okay, thank you very much. I am eager to meet you again, maybe in 1 month, okay? And
Okay.
I'm going to translate, make subtitles, and publish these our very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jan. Send me the link and I'll post it on social media.
Sure.